This is where I'll now begin to read and discuss section 3 of chapter 3, and this will go all the way to chapter 4. We've just learned that they found out that there was a recording, a gramophone actually, that said and accused all of the House members of a specific murder on a specific date of a specific person. And so they've just discovered this gramophone and have found out that it was Mr. Rogers that was following Mr. Owens's directions into play this this record basically, and the title of that record, it said on it, was Swan Song, and that does have a specific meaning. Swan Song is, and I'll actually go to another resource for you, is Swan Song can be found out why it was called that, and it was just a take on the behind the meaning of Swan Song. It was just a take on the title. As you can see here on SparkNotes, it says the record is entitled Swan Song, and here we go. The name Ewan Owen, or as Wargrave translated, is unknown, is a play on words. Additionally, the title of the record that announces the crimes is Swan Song, a term that refers to the sweet song supposedly sung by dying swans. The host central and most pervious word game involves the 10 Little Indians. So the author has incorporated into the novel these play on words, and you'll see that more through the novel as well. Okay, so back to section 3. General MacArthur broke out suddenly. He exclaimed, "The whole thing is preposterous! Preposterous! Slinging accusations about like this. Something must be done about it. This fellow Owen, whoever he is." Emily Brent interrupted. She said sharply, "That's just it. Who is he?" The judge interposed. He spoke with authority that a lifetime in the courts had given him. He said, "That is exactly what we must go into very carefully. I suggest that you get your wife to bed first of all, Rogers, then come back here." "Yes, sir," Dr. Armstrong said. "I'll give you a hand, Rogers." Leaning on the two men, Mrs. Rogers tottered out of the room, and when they had gone, Tommy Marston said, Don't know about you, sir, but I could do with a drink." Lombard said, "I agree." Tony said, "I'll go and forage." He went out of the room. He returned a second or two later, found them all waiting on a tray outside ready to be brought in. He sat down his burden carefully. The next minute or two was spent in dispensing drinks. General MacArthur had a stiff whiskey, and so did the judge. Everyone felt a need of stimulant. Only Emily Brent demanded and obtained a glass of water. Dr. Armstrong re-entered the room. "She's all right," he said. "I've given her a sedative to take." "What's that, a drink?" "I could do with one." Several of the men refilled their glasses. A moment or two later Rogers re-entered the room. Mr. Justice Wargrave took charge of the proceedings. The room became an impromptu court of law. The judge said, "Now then, Rogers, we must get to the bottom of this. Who is this Mr. Owen?" Rogers stared. "He owns this place, sir. I'm aware of that fact. What I want you to tell me is what you yourself know about the man." Rogers shook his head. "I can't say, sir. You see, I've never seen him." There was a faint stir in the room. General MacArthur said, "You've never seen him? What do you mean?" "We've only been here just under a week, sir, my wife and I. We were engaged by letter through an agency, the Regina Agency in Plymouth." Bloor nodded. "Old established firm," he volunteered. Wargrave said, "Have you got that letter? The letter engaging us?" "No, sir, I didn't keep it." "Go on with your story. You were engaged, as you say, by letter?" "Yes, sir. We were to arrive on a certain day. We did everything. Everything was in order here. Plenty of food in stock and everything very nice. Just needed dusting and that." So here I want to point out that as we filled out the chart where you were to put down how were each character invited, you could actually do that now and put down some of the characteristics you know about Mr. and Mrs. Rogers, that they're the housekeeper and the butler. They did receive a letter, and they thought it was the Regina Agency in Plymouth who Mr. Owen had asked for them to find two people, and they found the Rogerses. That's how they were invited, and that can be put on your chart. What next? Nothing, sir. We got orders by letter to prepare the rooms for a house party, and then yesterday by the afternoon post I got another letter from Mr. Owen. It said he and Mrs. Owen were detained, and to do the best we could, and it gave the instructions about dinner and coffee and putting on the gramophone record. The judge said sharply, "Surely you've got that letter." "Yes, sir, I've got it here." He produced it from the pocket. The judge took it. He said, "headed Ritz Hotel and typewritten." With a quick movement, Bloor was beside him. He said, "If you'll just let me have a look at that." He twitched it out of the other's hand and ran his eye over it. He murmured, "Coronation machine, quite new, no defects, ensign paper, the most widely used make. You won't get anything out of that. Might be fingerprints, but I doubt it." Wargrave stared at him with sudden attention. Anthony Marston was standing beside Bloor, looking over his shoulders. He said, "Got some fancy Christian names, hasn't he? Ulick, Norman, Owen, quite a mouthful." The old judge said with a slight start, "I'm obliged to you, Mr. Marston. You have drawn my attention to a curious and suggestive point." He looked around at the others, and thrusting his neck forward like an urgent, angry tortoise, he said, "I think the time has come for us all to pool our information. It would be well, I think, for everybody to come forward with all the information they have regarding the owner of this house." He paused and then went on. "We were all his guests. I think it would be profitable for each one of us to explain exactly how that came about." There was a moment's pause, and then Emily Brent spoke with decision. "There's something very peculiar about this," she said. "I received a letter with a signature that was not very easy to read. It purported to be from a woman I had met at a certain summer resort 2 or 3 years ago. I took the name to be either Orden or Oliver. I'm acquainted with a Mrs. Oliver and also with a Mrs. Ogden. I'm quite certain that I've never met or become friendly with anyone of the name Owen." Mr. Justice Wargrave said, "You have that letter, Miss Brent?" "Yes, I'll fetch it for you." She went away and returned a minute later with the letter. The judge read it. He said, "I begin to understand, Miss Claythorne." Vera explained the circumstances of her secretarial engagement. The judge said, "Marston?" Anthony said, "Got a wire from a pal of mine, Badger, Berkeley." So Badger Berkeley is a friend of Marston's. I think I spoke about that with some of you in class, but if you've not filled that out on your chart, he got a wire, and a wire is just like it's a letter, but via an electronic method of receiving a wire. So I might write a letter to a wiring agency, and then they wire it either across town or across the state, and they would somebody else would pick up the wire in a letter format of what that person wanted them to know. Surprised me at the time because I had an idea the old horse had gone to Norway. Told me to roll up here. Again Wargrave nodded. He said, "Dr. Armstrong, I was called in professionally. I see you had no previous acquaintanceship with the family?" "No, a colleague of mine was mentioned in the letter." The judge said, "To give verisimilitude, yes, that colleague, I presume, was momentarily out of touch with you?" "Well, yes." Lombard, who'd been staring at Bloor, said suddenly, "Look here, I've just thought of something." The judge lifted a hand. "In a minute." Whoop, sorry, turn the page. I'm right here. We will take one thing at a time, Mr. Lombard. We are at present inquiring into the cause of which we've resulted in our being assembled here tonight. General MacArthur." Pulling at his mustache, the general muttered, "Got a letter from this fella Owen. Mentioned some old pals of mine were to be here. Hoped I'd excuse informal invitation. Haven't kept the letter, I'm afraid." Wargrave said, "Mr. Lombard?" Lombard's brain had been active. Was he to come out in the open or not? He made up his mind. Same sort of thing, he said. Invitation, mention of mutual friends. I fell for it, all right. I've torn up the letter. So here I want you to notice on this page right here, when it comes to Lombard, in which he is supposed to give how he was invited, which we know to be through Mr. Isaac Morris, because Mr. Lombard is somewhat of a type spy or secret agent type person that carries out certain missions. But here, Lombard actually lies and says that he received a letter just like everybody else and he torn up the letter. Wonder why he does this. What is his motive for not telling the truth? But I wanted to point that out. Mr. Justice Wargrave turned his attention to Mr. Bloor. His forefinger stroked his upper lip, and his voice was dangerously polite. He said, "Just now we had a somewhat disturbing experience. An apparently disembodied voice spoke to us all by name and uttering certain precise accusations against us. We will deal with those accusations presently. At the moment I'm interested in a minor point amongst the names. Recited was that of a William Henry Bloor, but as far as I know, there's no one named Bloor amongst us. The name of Davis was not mentioned. What have you to say about that, Mr. Davis?" So again, they've called out Mr. Davis, who we know is really Mr. Bloor from chapter 1, but he lied to them and said he was Mr. Davis. So here's coming up his explanation. Bloor said sulkily, "Cat's out of the bag, it seems. I suppose I'd better admit that my name isn't Davis." "You are William Henry Bloor?" "That's right. I will add something," said Lombard. "Not only are you here under a false name, Mr. Bloor, but in addition I've noticed that this evening that you're a first-class liar. You claim to have come from Natal, South Africa. I know South Africa and Natal, and I'm prepared to swear that you've never set foot in South Africa in your life." All eyes were turned on Bloor. Angry, suspicious eyes. Anthony Marston moved a step nearer to him. His fists clenched themselves. "Now then, you swine," he said. "Any explanation?" Bloor flung back his head and set his square jaw. "Your gentlemen have got me wrong," he said. "I've got my credentials and you can see them. I'm an ex-CID man, which is kind of like a FBI type agency. I run a detective agency in Plymouth. I was put on this job." Mr. Justice Wargrave asked, "By whom?" "This man Owen enclosed a handsome money order for expenses and instructed me as to what he wanted done. I was to join the house party, posing as a guest, and I was given all your names. I was to watch you all." "Any reason given?" Bloor said bitterly, "Mrs. Owen's jewels. Mrs. Owen, my foot. I don't believe there's any such person." Again the forefinger of the judge stroked his lip, this time appreciatively. "Your conclusions are, I think, justified," he said. "Ulick Norman Owen." In Miss Brent's letter, through a signature of the surname is mere scrawl, the Christian names are reasonably clear. Una Nancy. In either case you notice the same initials. Ulick Norman Owen, Una Nancy Owen, each time that is to say U.N. Owen. U.N. Owen, or by a slight stretch of fancy, unknown. So, press the page. So right here we find out that there's this implication by the judge that all the names were supposedly somehow connected with being invited by Mr. Owen. And specifically when it says these two names and you have the initials UN and the last name Owen, you can stretch it to kind of come up with the word unknown, like there's this unknown person. Vera cried, "But this is fantastic mad!" The judge nodded gently. He said, "Oh, yes, I've no doubt in my mind that we've been invited here by a madman, probably a dangerous, homicidal lunatic." This is the end of chapter 3, and I'll be posting it.